What's up, family? Welcome back to Mogi's Corner. It's your little brother Mogi coming at you from the beautiful Ginger City. So today I'm bringing you a slightly different video from what you would normally expect from me. But this is really important. In 2015, Dr. Howard Nicholas gave this lecture at the Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University of Rotterdam, where he's also a senior lecturer of economics. Now, he talked about so many reasons why Africa is poor and what is being done by the European power structure to keep Africa poor. This is very disheartening. I want you to take a listen and I'll be back with you.
Africa, historically, sub-Saharan Africa, has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity.
Number one, he talks about how foreign aid is being used to keep Africa behind and poor. So when we see all these aid agencies, for example, USAID, UK Aid, and all those agencies that come to Africa in the guise of helping, it's not how we see it. And that is our problem as black people. We normally tend to look at things from the outside and ignore the bigger picture. We need to start looking at things from the inside, start focusing on the bigger prize and the bigger picture, and understanding, or should I say overstand. So he discusses how foreign aid is being used to keep Africa poor. Listen to him.
Okay, we give them aid. Aid for what? Actually, we give them aid to keep repressive regimes in power. That's all. Okay, we're not giving them aid for much more except a little bit of infrastructure to make sure those raw materials get to the ports and are gotten out of the ground. But for the most part, we give repressive regimes money and power and guns to keep that system going. This is what it's fundamentally about. All the hypocrisy about transparency and democracy and bullshit like that, it's all bullshit. You know? And at least the Chinese don't enter into that bullshit. They say, we don't care about the whole political environment, we just give the money. Okay? And it's for raw material extraction.
Point number two, debt and loan. He discusses how the Western countries have used debt and loans given to African leaders or African countries to keep them poor, to keep them backward. You know, oftentimes these loans come in form of infrastructure developments where African countries are given infrastructures such as bridges, roads, dams. And then we have to make concessions, give them concessions. But it's all a trap. It's all a trap. Listen to Professor Howard Nicholas explaining how this has been used to trap us Africans. And it's such a disgrace that we're able to play to their tune, believe them, and think that they are helping us. And yet they are not. You know, recently, in my country, Uganda, there was talks of our airport being taken over by the Chinese. because the loan which was negotiated between the Uganda government and the Chinese government could not be paid. Hence, the Chinese took over the airport. Such things, so many things elsewhere in Zambia, where the Chinese are taking over the mines, the ports. You know what's been going on. You know the story elsewhere. We need to wake up and start seeing these things for exactly what they are. Take a listen.
I was telling some of my students today, was it today or yesterday, about Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You remember this? Have any of you heard of this one? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's a book written by John Perkins, who used to work for a very nebulous, opaque bank. No one had ever heard of this bank, but it was formed in the 1950s by the IMF, the CIA, and the American State Department. And it had only one job: to lend money to developing countries that were raw material producers in order to indebt them. Once you are in my debt, I control you. Okay? And this bank had 4,000 employees. But no one ever heard of this bank, you see. But it would go to country after country offering loans. And if the president did not accept the loan, they were killed. And he gives two examples of presidents who were killed when they did not accept the loan. You see, the lending is also very important to trap the country. It's very important. It's part of that process. I teach in Suriname. And Suriname in recent times had a huge foreign exchange reserve. So big they didn't need to borrow money. And then one of my students, who was very high up in government, he said, you know, the IMF is trying to convince us to borrow money from foreigners. Why? I thought, sorry about this, but, this is the game. And in the end, Suriname did borrow this money because the IMF said, if foreigners lend to you, then everyone will think Suriname is such a strong economy that foreigners are interested in lending to you. You understand? Before Lula came to power, the previous president in Brazil, Cardoso, his predecessor, took a gigantic international loan. No necessity for taking the loan. Why? Because once I catch you with the debt strings, I hold you forever. You are my prisoner. Okay, so debt has been this huge spider's web which has trapped sub-Saharan Africa and keeps them held there. Aid, debt.
Point number 3 that Dr. Howard Nicholas discusses is monopoly over buying the raw materials of Africa, the crude oil, the gold, and all the other minerals. When you look at it, a group of Western companies are responsible for that. You will find it doesn't matter where, East Africa, Central Africa, West Africa, or South Africa. Most oil-producing countries, the companies that exploit the oil, are always the same. The companies that exploit the gold, the minerals, the copper, the tungsten, and everything are always similar. And that's keeping Africa poor and behind. Listen to Dr. Howard Nicholas.
All raw materials and basic agricultural goods produced by developing countries, there are only 4 or 5 Western multinationals that buy all those goods. And they collude between them. So if you take any major product, these Western multinationals, they collude between them. Even if we go down to banana production, we had a PhD down here at the ISS, and the person showed that the 4 or 5 major multinationals, they collude, and in order to make sure their control is total, what they do is they force all the producers to produce the same uniform banana. You know, the crap you buy in the West and has no taste at all. You go to any developing country, you know how a banana tastes, don't you? There's so many of them, lots of varieties, but we only market 1 or 2 types, so we have control, you see. If you don't produce at the price I want you to produce, I go to the next country. You see, we get control. So these buyers, they impose that control, and they keep pushing the prices down and down and down. Okay, this is the game. No one says anything about it. There are no commissions of inquiry to say this is illegal what you're doing. The WTO has nothing to say about this. But sorry to say, you know, if banana prices rose 10 times, especially for people like me who love bananas, okay, I protest. I like my living standards. Okay, it's the same with all the other raw materials, you see. We're all benefiting, we're complicit. We're actually complicit in this because we will protest and shout out if the situation ever changed.
Point number 4. International lending institutions such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and several others. These are a trap for African countries. They extend loans to African countries, which are debt traps to keep them indebted. You know, when you look at the interest on these loans, the interest is so high that it cannot be paid back. And hence they keep us under their control through debt. And you all know one of the reasons why Colonel Muammar Gaddafi of Libya was murdered by the white man is because he wanted to, he decampaigned, he did a great job of decampaigning such Western lending institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and he wanted Africa to borrow within. He wanted to start a Pan-African bank which would lend money to all African countries. And nobody saw this. Nobody saw this, you know. Nobody supported him. Our African leaders, they didn't support him. This is really bad. Very sad, actually. So, here is Professor Howard Nicholas explaining to you how international lending institutions are used to keep Africa poor.
IMF, World Bank, WTO. We always think evil creatures, horrible. It's not. It's just economics. It's economic warfare. The rich declare war on the poor. It happens everywhere. It happens in a country. The rich control the government. Of course they do. You really believe you have democracy? Come on. You know, I mean, grow up. This is not about people living in democratic systems. What we have is the rich control. The rich set up these institutions explicitly to control the poor countries. and they don't give them much room for maneuver. Which incidentally, when the IMF starts talking of poverty alleviation, you should also understand that there's another game there also starting to play, which I'm going to come back to later. But what do these institutions do? What does the IMF do? What is structural adjustment about? It's about making sure countries keep producing what we want them to produce. We make sure they have recurrent balance of payments problems. You notice these countries never get out of balance of payments problems. You notice that? Whereas countries that never took IMF support are always out of balance of payments problems. But the countries that are continuously getting advice and support by the IMF, they're always in balance of payments problems. Why? Because that's the way we keep our stranglehold on them.
Point number 5. And guys, this is really dear to my heart. This is very as close to my heart as nothing else. Point number 5, how the Western power structure keeps Africa poor is through ownership and control of your food supply. This is sad. You all know I've talked about genetically modified seeds many times on this channel. And some of you don't understand what I'm talking about. Perhaps when you hear Dr. Howard Nicholas talking, maybe you will believe and perhaps open your eyes to the reality of things and what is really going on. Africans are no longer in control of their food. And this is an initiative that has been put forward through the genetically modified seeds. We have been convinced that these seeds are resilient to climate change, resistant to diseases and pests, but it's all a lie. It's all a lie. And we have been convinced to destroy our, traditional seeds and traditional farming. I also talked about this in one of my videos. You can go and watch it. It's disgraceful that we are buying manure from Europe to farm in Africa. What happened to the most fertile land on the face of the earth, Africa, to see that we have to import manure from Europe. We have to import fertilizer from Europe to come and grow our food. It's a shame on all of us. It is a shame. So what they do, they tell us, hey, you can't continue farming with those seeds. Throw them away, destroy them, and take the genetically modified seeds. And this has undermined continuity of our food supply because, as you all know, the genetically modified seeds cannot be replanted. I talked about the corn, the beans, soybeans, mention it, everything, anything, the fruits, the vegetables. So what you do is after you harvest, at the next planting season, you have to go back to them and buy more seeds. What happened? We all have allowed this. And we have ourselves to blame. We have ourselves to blame. We can't blame them. what they're doing is right in their opinion. And according to the agenda they are trying to set up, it's the right thing for them to do. But we have ignored our own black agenda, our own African agenda. We have failed to come up with solutions to our problems and looked upon our enemy for our solutions. That's detrimental. However, the time is not late. We are not late yet. We still have enough time and chance and power and authority to reverse that. Here is Dr. Howard.
Colonization started it. Okay? One of the most important things is we destroy food self-sufficiency. Okay? And the World Bank continued it. They forced most countries to eliminate all food subsidies and food support. Okay? Because once you don't produce your own food, I increase my control over you. How do we know this? Well, very funny thing happened some years ago. Not so funny, actually. It involved starvation of a large number of people in Malawi. Okay? Many of you could remember this because it was really tragic. But the Malawian finance minister, who was under terrible threat at the time, suddenly broke ranks and he said, well, you know why we had this famine? Because one of the conditions of the loan given by the World Bank was we destroyed all our grain surplus stocks. Why? Because remember, we want you dependent. 1970s, the US Senate, the US Congress said, we will not allow Latin America to produce their own food. We will start a strategy involving the IMF and the World Bank to destroy food self-sufficiency of Latin America. Then they will indeed be our true backyard. And that's exactly what they've done. Look at all the Latin American countries. Look at them. They used to be food self-sufficient, but they're no longer food self-sufficient. Now here comes the kicker. This is the beautiful part of it. I congratulate them. You know, I admire them because they do it so well. Okay? I know it sounds really perverse, but we have now in the WTO something called the Agreement on Agriculture. Okay? You know what that Agreement on Agriculture states? It says, if you don't have any subsidies, you're not allowed to put these subsidies on food. But if you have subsidies and income support for food production, you can keep them. Who has all the subsidies and income support? US, Europe. The largest budgets in the world for supporting their farmers are Europe and US. But the World Bank and IMF have destroyed all those subsidies. You see, all those subsidies have been destroyed. And now we're telling these countries, you don't have subsidies, tough luck. You know? You see, we're keeping them dependent. We're keeping them on a string.
Education. Point number 6. And these are not the only ones that are being used to keep Africa behind. There are so many out there. So many ways. But in this video, we shall stick to these. Education. The European came with his education system and we embraced it. But it does not help us. It does not serve our best interests as black people. You know, several steps here in Uganda are being taken to revise the education system. But it's not enough. We need a complete and total overhaul of the education system for the black child if we want to thrive. The white man convinced us with the concept of comparative advantage. You will hear Dr. Howard Nicholas discuss it. And the funny thing is, everything that is being used against us is being hidden in plain sight. That's why people like Howard Nicholas are able to come out and talk about these things, but we don't take them serious. We don't take him serious. And that is the greatest weapon being used against us, is that we are able to see things, see the problem, see the danger ahead of us, and yet we are too slow, too weak to do anything about it. We always look towards other people to help us solve our problems.
We teach, in many cases, garbage, and it doesn't hurt anyone, a lot of this garbage. You know, it's just blah, 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 blah. And we don't know what we have learned, but anyway, we were there at the university and you got a certificate and you go away and you feel you've learned something. But sometimes we teach very destructive things. And no more important than when we're teaching people from developing countries. Okay, and one of those very damaging and destructive things is the doctrine of comparative advantage. It's a lie from beginning to end. It's utter crap. It has been decimated many times, but we keep it in every curriculum. Why? Because it tells sub-Saharan African countries that their destiny is to produce raw materials, you see. And if you produce raw materials, you get rich just like we are in the West. You see, this is the game we're playing, and just for you to be totally confused, we normally build models with it, mathematical models, so you really have no idea what we're talking about, but it seems all very scientific. Then we have the modern version of this is because it's all a failure, we know it's a failure, we now have a new generation of economists saying, it's only a failure because you're all corrupt in your countries. We call that new institutional economics. You've all probably learnt it all, but you didn't know why they invented it. It was invented to tell you the same thing. You should keep producing raw materials. Now, don't be as corrupt as you were before. Nobody ever told you that aid was designed to actually start the corruption process in the first place. Okay, and we need corruption to make sure you're doing all these things. But now we blame the victim. You're poor because it's your fault, basically. And you're poor, stupid, and corrupt, basically. This is the message that we're...
Here's what I'm saying. We need to rise up, identify our problems, seek solutions, not external solutions, homegrown solutions to our problems. And how do we do that? We do that by acting, taking matters into our hands to start doing something. We have been talking a lot. So many years we have been talking and talking and talking. But talking has not brought any change. Talking has not brought any change. But action will do. So I'm calling upon all you, my brothers and sisters, to start acting. Practice what you preach. Africa, rise.